folks, I apologize for the long string of boring videos. I've noticed my videos steadily getting less and less views, and I believe it's because it has been so long since I've done my usual shtick. Either that or I done pissed everyone off, which I am totally cool with, so this will be the last video I do for a while that is nothing more, or next to nothing more, than just ideological preaching via text-to-speech. But this is another all text-to-speech video, so if you'd rather just read the transcript on my blog, link in the description. There is a trend I see in our movement from our fellow MRAs and those who seem interested in the MRM but constantly insist that they are neither a feminist or an MRA because MRAs are as bad as the feminists. That whole bit about "you're just as bad as the feminists" remark that is way too common in this movement. That is traditionalism right there. You see, these traditionalists dislike feminism because feminism destroyed the traditional marriage, the traditional way of life between the sexes. This is why they hate feminism, and join the movement that opposes feminism. The problem becomes when someone in the MRM has a viewpoint, just an idea, that doesn't fall within the traditionalist values. That makes this individual every bit as hostile to traditionalism as the feminists. And I really need to drive that message home to everyone. Those who claim you are being just like the feminists are just bitching that you're not advocating their traditionalist views. That's what I think all this marriage obsession that Rocking Mystery and the Critical G is about. It's about traditionalism, and somehow right-wing fanaticism gets mixed in there. The statement "they're as bad as the feminists" is coming from the traditionalist point of view. The term "they're talking like leftists" I believe is coming from the fact that traditionalism and right-wing conservatism really go hand in hand. I sometimes think that the divide between MRA and MGTOW is really just traditionalist versus men's liberation, for lack of any other word. Well, if this is the case, then in my book, MGTOW is the real MRM, and MRAs are just traditionalists. If that's the case, then I'm MGTOW, because I am no traditionalist. Now don't get me wrong, I do not stand in full opposition to traditionalism. In fact, the traditionalist does have two very powerful arguments. 1. It worked for countless thousands of years. Okay, I gotta give him that. 2. It is in tune with the natural biologically driven role of the sexes. Well, yes, I do believe this. I think it is the most logical role for the sexes. That's how it came to be, and that's why it lasted for countless thousands of years. But here's the problem: it may be in tune with our biology, and it may have worked in the past, but as you can plainly see, it no longer works for society as a whole. Many will scream, but that's because feminism screwed it up, and I would agree. But that's also an oversimplification of the problem that completely misses the point. And while I have mentioned this in a previous video, I am going to say it again. Feminism is a combination of women being women, that is, female nature, along with a change in social dynamics brought about by the Industrial Revolution, and then funded by communist parties for Marxist interest. Hell, communism itself came out of the Industrial Revolution. Someone, whose name I don't remember, said something to the effect of, "Life changed more for humanity from the Industrial Revolution to now, than in all the years before it." Well, I'm not enough of a historian to verify the accuracy of that statement, but it sounds plausible. There is no denying the importance economics has on society, and there is no denying that the Industrial Revolution brought about economic change on a massive scale. It is my belief that feminism, while the pathology of it is born of female nature, only flourished and became an actual successful movement as a result of economic changes brought on by the Industrial Revolution. An example of this is humans required certain things such as food, clothing, shelter. Well, these things don't appear out of thin air. These things are born out of trades and labor. Since most work was physically demanding, the male is clearly advantaged, since it is not only desirable, but necessary, that humans pair off and reproduce. Someone must tend to the children. While I have no reason to believe that women make better parents, I can say men make better workers. Thus the man left the house, done the physically brutal work necessary to build the things, or earn the money to buy things. While I don't think the children would really be better or worse being nurtured by the father, it is clear that level of production and income would be disadvantaged if it were the woman's role. So ultimately, the man worked like a plow horse, the woman sat with the children. This means that all of the material benefits, both of luxury and necessity, were born out of the man's labor. Since it was his labor, all things his family enjoyed was actually his property, since he was obligated to make the things or earn the wages, to support the children. The children were then his property because they were dependent upon his labor. This is also true with the wife, who was also completely dependent on the man's labor. This made her, to some extent, his property, because she was after all a dependent, a financial burden only kept alive by the man's labor. This also meant that the man was the sole authority figure. Both children and wife must abide by his rules, and this is the way it always was. Now of course, depending on the culture and the time period, various other rules would exist, like you may or may not sell wife or children, in spite of them being property, and lots of little changing rules like that. But here's the thing, after the Industrial Revolution, the rules of labor changed. The technological revolution preceded the Industrial Revolution, though it is easily argued the Industrial Revolution was born of technology. But due to mass production, we now had corporations, and due to technology we now had all sorts of new and physically easy labor that paid a fair wage against physically difficult labor, and of course corporations that would hire many people to fill these positions. This opened the doors to women who could now get a job and work like a man. Many housewives, whose children didn't need to be sat with 24/7, wanted to help alleviate her husband's burden of labor by getting a part-time job doing light work. Other young women also had new job opportunities to help her family pay the bills, and as time went on, women working and earning income became more commonplace. Suddenly young ladies, who hadn't found the right suitor yet, would get a job to support herself, alleviating the burden to her father, while waiting to find just the right man to be wedded to. This sort of thing kept on until there was actually a lot of women working, but it was often part-time jobs, or full-time, with the understanding that this is a temporary measure until Prince Charming pops the question and proposes. Corporations exploited the hell out of these women, often working them the same hours at a lower pay, and there was, to be fair, reason to pay the men more salary. A woman's income was mostly her luxury. A man's income fed his wife and children. There were unions and union talk about it, and it was decided it was in the greater good to allow the women to work the same job for less pay. Then rules were erected by unions and corporate policies that adjusted how long women could be worked, and how much they could be paid. This was done to protect women from exploitation, and to protect the interest of male workers whose families' lives depended on his income, in far more cases than when women worked. Lots of politics and union issues ensued as women began making up a significant portion of the workforce. This, around the women's suffrage era, on top of early feminist writings, often communist-inspired, created what we now call first-wave feminism. First wave was dealing with women's role in the workforce that was born out of post-industrial revolution, in conjunction with communist literature, that was often disguised as anti-theist and or women's liberationist literature, which was changing our academic institutions and art societies. Then came women's suffrage, and the entire thing really just came together as women's liberation, which we now look back on as first-wave feminism. In World War II, many men were enlisted and drafted. The female workforce grew immensely to compensate for lack of male laborers, who are off dying in the war. After the war, the men returned home, and I suppose society just thought women should quit their jobs, and get back in the kitchen. Not all the women would agree to this. They just got through experiencing the life of being a breadwinning man. They learned skills, got promotions, and developed dreams and aspirations of being something even greater. The men had a real hard time telling them to quit daydreaming, and go back to being the little lady. The women could easily argue just how possible it is for women to make up the labor force, as they had just got through doing. This, in my opinion, was Pandora's box. Traditionalism is no longer applicable because it is no longer a necessity. Women can, and have, and are, working like men and supporting themselves, and many of them don't want to give up that independent lifestyle to become the subservient property of their breadwinning husband. They had to in the past, environment dictated it, but today the environment has changed. The doors of opportunity for women to be workers is open, and anything short of a totalitarian government, and possibly Islam to act as cultural reinforcement, will ever close that door and absolutely force men to be breadwinners and force women back into the home. Therefore, I cannot object to traditionalism pre-industrial revolution. I do not object to the lifestyle itself. I do not deny how natural it is for us. I deny that in a free society that enough women will submit to being a traditional housewife, surrendering her autonomy to make it work. I believe many couples will, just not enough for our traditional way of life to be common. Either we ask women to give up their independent lifestyle ambitions and get back in the kitchen living under the authority of their breadwinning husband, and just hope that about 90% agree to this, or we force it on them by taking away their human rights. Well folks, I don't believe women in general will capitulate to our demands, and I personally feel it is a violation of their human rights to deprive them of education and job opportunity. But the biggest problem we are facing is women can currently play it both ways at their own personal discretion, and us men can't do that. A woman can be Little Miss Independent if she wants, or until it becomes boring, but that pussy will always set her value high enough to get a guy to work like a traditionalist plow horse whenever she wants. In free society, women have the option to work, or have a man support her, unless she's really fucking ugly and can't get a man to support her, and that's when the socialist welfare system comes in. But that's a different story. and very few men will ever get the option to live off of the fruits of his wife's labor. So, women get options, men do not. But even more tragic is that so long as the option is there for women to be independent, our entire culture and laws will not give authority to husbands over wives. Thus we get a society where most women are either unemployed or only partially employed, dependent on a man's labor, yet hold equal authority. This is an imbalance in power. For a man to work like a slave, come home to his lazy unemployed wife, and have no authority in his house, makes him a slave. In the past, a man worked like a slave, but he came home and had sole authority over his wife and child. This made things fair. But if a man cannot have that authority, then his work like a slave role, really is the role of a slave. No matter what your age, or sex, if you are financially dependent on someone, that someone has authority over you. That's just the way it is. Women gave up their autonomy, but they had the privilege of staying home. This made it fair. Traditional marriage was in the past, more or less fair for both sexes. But remember, it only functioned because women weren't given the option to work. A technologically advanced society post-industrial revolution has created a whole new environment that does give women that option. It is unfortunate that I don't have a perfect one-size-fits-all plan to remedy this situation. I have a lot of ideas that would be classified more as wonky idealism, and totally off the wall. And that's the big problem we face. I don't think there is any tried and true solution we can implement. We're going to have to think outside the box. We're going to need the freedom to discuss many wacky and off-the-wall ideas. We're going to have to get together and start throwing all sorts of batshit crazy ideas against the wall until one of them sticks. This is where a lot of the left-wing, right-wing fanaticism instantly kills these ideas. Any idea that goes against someone's fanatical, rigid, inflexible, dogmatic beliefs, and they instantly start shouting accusations of leftist, rightist, nihilist, gender ideologue, collectivist, socialist, libertarian, infiltrator, mangina, misogynist, bigot, you're just as bad as the feminists, and so on. The majority of all the silencing tactics in our movement comes from right-wing fanaticism. Realize, I am not advocating for leftism and socialism or saying that there is some inherent evil in right-wing philosophy. I am merely saying that the vast majority of this movement is right-wing, and too many of those right-wingers are downright fanatical and beyond reasoning. Anything that deviates in any way from their dogmatic right-wing utopian view, and they instantly start throwing accusations and character assassinations, causing a rift in the movement. As Barbarossa put it, this left-right paradigm is the idea inhibitor of the movement, and he hit the nail right on the head. We are facing really big and complex problems. There is no instant one-size-fits-all solution. There is no quick fix. There is no simple plan. We are facing an extremely complicated problem with many contributing factors, and we are going to have to work really hard exploring any and every possibility imaginable. And we can't do this because you get the least bit out of line with the right-wing traditionalists and they immediately start calling you names, throwing accusations of leftist infiltrator. You get Bernard Chapin calling great thinkers in our movement like Barbarossa, Cockroacher, Rocking Mystery and Bernard Chapin do more to stifle the free exchange of ideas than the PC leftists ever did. They viciously attack anyone that disagrees with them. They use hyperbole and character assassination as their primary rebuttal to everything, and yet keep a high subscriber count by pandering to right-wing sentiment within our movement. So long as Chapin and Rocking Mr. E keep up their right-wing rhetoric, they can say any idiotic thing, attack anyone in the movement, silence all discussion, and maintain a high subscriber count, all because they're serving up a hearty dosage of right-wing Kool-Aid to get the right-wingers drunk on. I recall getting a lot of inboxes. Well, okay, maybe not a lot. But I got some inboxes after doing the video The Woolly Bumblebee vs. Intelligence, from my female subscribers, that told me they were worried that I am becoming an extremist like Barbarossa or Stardust. They told me they supported the MRM, but just not the woman-hating misogyny of people like Barbarossa. Well, at the time I was only half familiar with his work. I had listened to close to half his videos, and never really heard anything over the top from Barbarossa. The only thing I ever heard that I ever really disagreed with is his stance that he'd find a man not guilty of rape if he were on the jury, but other than that, I can't find any fault with Barb's advice, and I believe he is probably the smartest guy in this movement. So I would write these women back, and ask more specifically what it is about Barbarossa and Stardust that make them so evil and misogynist. They all gave me the same answer, that Barbar and Stardust believe feminism is the fault of women, as opposed to just a rotten idea that spawned out of thin air, held by only a few misguided women, and magically spread throughout the developed Western world unopposed. They are against Barbar and Stardust because they don't support marriage, and oh how they just need to learn how to find the right women. That's right folks, before the critical G made that statement big, there were women already saying that it's just a matter of finding the right girls. These women also went out of their way to mention how good rocking Mr. E is for the movement. Again, this, I believe, was just weeks before the critical G made his video about using MGTOW as an excuse. In case you guys haven't guessed, these women aren't MRAs, they're just anti-feminist, and only because they are traditionalists, and feminism is what destroyed traditionalism. These women don't give a fuck about our movement. They don't care whether we ever have equality or whether men ever get treated as more than disposable utilities. These women just want to stay at home all pampered, watching TV, and keeping an eye on the kids, pop in a microwavable TV dinner and call it being a housewife while their husband bangs his body up doing hard physical labor in the blistering heat, or deals with pissy customers all day, or fills out paperwork and calls people on the phone all day long trying to make business deals, all the while his boss breathes down his neck, and he hopes and prays today isn't the day he gets the axe. These self-serving females want the luxury of living like a spoiled princess at the expense of their male counterpart that works like a slave and can be traded in for a new one the moment he doesn't bring home enough money to support a spoiled lifestyle. So those women who think this way, these women don't give a fuck about us. Be very cautious of women that say they don't support feminism. They are often every bit as hostile to our well-being as the feminists. Now don't get me wrong, there are some good women in our movement. But maybe you understand why I am still very cautious of them. And let me point out something about this traditional setup. Women once upon a time did do a lot of work. Back before the average house had electricity, women had to wash all the laundry by hand, sweep the floors with an old bristle broom, take the rugs out and beat them, wash all the dishes by hand, in a time period where there were no disposable dishes, and fix dinner on a wood stove on a hot summer day, with the windows and door open, and no fan or air conditioner, all the while tending to the children. So yeah, women did work hard, not as hard as their husbands choking on coal dust or hammering shingles on a roof on a hot summer day, but they still did do a lot of work. Today, a housewife vacuums the floor, wipes down a few countertops, tosses the clothes in the washer then the dryer, throws some dishes in the dishwasher, microwaves a meal for her and the kid in a few minutes, and spends the rest of the day surfing the web, gossiping on the phone with her gal pals, and they all gossip about how rotten and horrible their husbands are, and then watches TV, while for the most part ignoring the kid. I'm sorry ladies, but you are not pulling your weight and contributing shit. Your great-great-grandma may have been pulling her weight, hell, even your great-grandma, maybe even, just maybe, your grandma, but not you. But the real question we have is, what do we do about our situation? Seems to me we either force equality down their throats until they choke to death on it, make women live the way we live, or we erect a strong patriarchal society not too dissimilar from the way feminists claim things used to be, in order to force traditional roles on men and women, but realize that comes with forbidding women to work by law, which means no school for them since school won't be needed for anything, and they probably shouldn't be voting. After all, if women are not serving in military, are not working for the nation's economy, have no education, contribute nothing but their reproductive organs, while parasitically leeching off of men, then why the fuck should they be voting? So either we force equality down their throats, including shaming them for not having a job, and calling them bums and looking down on them for not having a job, forcing them to register for selective service like us men, and just all around forcing rotten miserable equality on them, or we take away their rights as people and turn them back into the property of the father which gets handed over to the husband. I don't think we can have too much of anything in between, for I fear that would work out to what we have now, women getting the best of both worlds, all the privileges and rights, with none of the obligations and responsibility. Another possible remedy to the breadwinner and dependent problem in a marriage, is to sign different types of heavily enforced marital contracts that clearly defines exactly what type of marriage we are entering into, and exactly how much any given person is to support the other, and exactly how much autonomy any person has, and exactly how much authority anyone has. We may have to make amendments, allowing both husband and wife to amend their contract if both agree to the amendment. This type of thing will not even be possible until we have completely destroyed the feminist movement, and completely rid our society of its misandric attitude. And no, I don't wholeheartedly endorse the above proposal as a remedy, I merely put it out there as an example of the sort of things we are going to have to discuss and consider, and to do so free of character assassination, and removed from secondary things like right-wing and left-wing loyalties. I tell you this, if you want to be a part of the MRM, and you want to act as anything other than dead weight in our movement, you're going to have to drop the left-right bullshit. and elevates the MRM above all other political belief systems you identify with. I'm not saying you can't have left or right-wing beliefs. I'm merely saying that men having rights needs to trump those beliefs.